The movie begins on the morning of May 9th, inside the small apartment of Roy Pulver, a former Delta Force captain who has clearly lived through this moment countless times before. He wakes up in bed beside a woman named Alice, who has no idea what is about to happen. Almost immediately, her calm is shattered when the door bursts open and a man wielding a large machete storms inside, aiming directly for Roy's head. Rather than panicking, Roy moves with precision and casualness, as though he has rehearsed every single motion. He ducks and sidesteps in perfect timing, effortlessly avoiding each strike. His expression shows more irritation than fear. He even mutters complaints about how repetitive and boring the attacks have become. The chaos escalates when the sound of whirring blades fills the air outside the apartment. A military helicopter rises up outside his window, carrying another assassin armed with a heavy machine gun. The gunman sprays the room with bullets, but in the confusion ends up accidentally killing the machete-wielding assassin, mistaking him for Roy. Rather than leaping into action, Roy seems unfazed. He simply drops onto the couch with a weary sigh, as if this absurd firefight were part of his daily routine. His eyes drift to a framed photograph sitting nearby, an image of his ex, 𝐒𝐲𝐬𝐬, hinting that despite the insanity surrounding him, his thoughts remain tied to someone from his past. After the helicopter smashes through the apartment window in a fiery crash, Roy makes a split-second decision. He leaps out of the wreckage and lands on the back of a passing truck loaded with sand, cushioning his fall. Without hesitation, he carjacks the startled driver, tossing him aside and taking control of the vehicle. As Roy speeds through the streets, two more assassins suddenly appear in pursuit. With his usual dark humor, he sarcastically nicknames them Pam and Esmeralda, mocking the routine nature of their attempts on his life. Driving at full throttle, Roy weaves recklessly between cars, narrowly avoiding disaster at every turn. But in his overconfidence, he overlooks one critical detail: an enormous truck barreling straight toward him. By the time he notices, it's too late. His car slams head-on into the vehicle, sending Roy hurtling violently through the windshield. The impact kills him instantly, ending yet another one of his endless, brutal loops. Roy begins narrating his situation, revealing that he has already died 140 times, each death forcing him to relive the exact same day in a relentless time loop. No matter how skilled he becomes at dodging his enemies, it never seems to end. Every time he escapes one assassin, another quickly takes their place. He lists off his recurring tormentors like a twisted roll call of killers. There are the first 4 he encounters at the start of every cycle, but they're only the beginning. Among them is a deadly martial artist, a swordswoman named Guan Yin, who makes a dramatic ritual of every kill, proudly announcing her name before swiftly decapitating him. Then there's a ruthless demolitions expert, a dwarf nicknamed Kaboom, who delights in blasting Roy apart with explosives. Roy even runs into versions of himself, including a doppelgänger he bitterly calls Roy 2. And just when he thinks it couldn't get more humiliating, there's Smiley, a sadistic assassin who skewers Roy with a harpoon before dragging him across the streets behind his truck like roadkill. For Roy, death isn't just constant, it's creative. Every new loop is another inventive execution, and the killers seem to have endless ways of making him suffer. On his 48th attempt to survive the day, Roy decides to change things up and tries reaching out to the one person who still means something to him, 𝐒𝐲𝐬𝐬, his former lover. He dials the number for the company where she works, desperately hoping to hear her voice. Instead, the call is intercepted by her superior, the cold and intimidating Colonel Clive Ventor. Ventor speaks flatly, almost mockingly, as he informs Roy that 𝐒𝐲𝐬 has died in what he describes as an accident. But Roy isn't fooled, not for a second. He knows Ventor is lying, and that 𝐒𝐲𝐬's death wasn't an accident at all. She was murdered, and Ventor is involved. Before Roy can press further or get any answers, chaos erupts. 2 relentless killers, identical in appearance and brutal in their methods, burst onto the scene. Roy has nicknamed them the German twins because of their synchronized efficiency and ruthless teamwork. They waste no time unleashing hell on him. Roy barely has a chance to react before gunfire shreds through the air, forcing him into cover. But the twins are merciless, and in moments they overwhelm him, triggering an explosion that ends yet another one of his attempts in a fiery death. In one of his countless attempts to break free from the endless loop, Roy manages to track down Pam and Esmeralda, 2 of the assassins who regularly hunt him. This time, instead of simply trying to outrun them, he decides to take the offensive. Luring them into a warehouse, Roy sets up an explosive trap and successfully eliminates them both in one fiery blast. Afterward, needing a moment to decompress, Roy heads to a familiar spot, a small diner where he knows the routine as well as his own. He takes a seat at the counter and is greeted by his friend Jake, the bartender who's used to Roy's odd requests. Roy orders not just a drink, but 2 full bottles of 𝐒𝐲𝐬𝐬, planning to drown his frustration in the potent liquor. While he drinks, Roy can't help but overhear the endless rambling of another regular customer, Dave. Dave is always there, always talking, and always telling the most tedious stories that drag on with no point. Normally, Roy would ignore it, but after dozens of failed loops, his patience has completely eroded. He listens with half an ear, lets the alcohol wash over him, and eventually blurts out something foolish, simply because he no longer cares about appearances or consequences. In the midst of this routine, Roy also notices a woman named Dai Feng, who, without fail, enters the diner at exactly the same time every single day. Her consistency, like everything else in this loop, is just another reminder of how trapped he is in a script he cannot seem to escape. Roy reflects bitterly on his situation, admitting that no matter what he tries, he has never managed to survive beyond 12:47 p.m. Gemma brings up the subject that always cuts Roy the deepest: their son, Joe. She reminds him that Joe doesn't even know Roy is his father. Meanwhile, they're not as alone as Roy thinks. He takes hold of Roy's resume, giving it a glance before passing it along. Ventor himself remarks that someone like Roy, smart, persistent, and not easily intimidated, might be able to uncover what they're plotting, which makes him a potential problem. Before Roy leaves the lab, Gemma leans in close and urgently whispers a single word to him: Osiris. Later that day, Roy tries to shake the unease off at a bar. He finds comfort in conversation with Gabrielle, another bartender friend of his. But when Alice excuses herself to go to the bathroom, Roy's phone suddenly buzzes. It's Gemma again, her voice strained and full of urgency. She tells him cryptically that she may soon have to take a drastic step, something that sounds like a last resort, though she doesn't explain exactly what it is. It wasn't just an ordinary present. As Roy flips through its pages, he finds a handwritten note tucked carefully inside, Gemma's familiar handwriting standing out against the printed text. In her message, she urges him to think about the way he's been living, stuck in the past, unable to move on, and reminds him that life is meant to be lived moving forward. The book, with its themes of death, rebirth, and eternal cycles, feels less like a random gift and more like a deliberate warning, Gemma's way of guiding him, even from afar, toward the bigger picture. Attempt 143 marks one of the most important and emotionally charged loops Roy has endured. On this run, he decides to follow young Joe after spotting him earlier, noticing the boy picking something up from another kid. Inside, Roy finally approaches Joe, who is caught off guard but not frightened. Joe casually admits that he ditched school that day, not to get into trouble, but to participate in a video game tournament with his friends. The suspicious exchange Roy had noticed outside turns out to be nothing more than a harmless trade of collectible cards between kids. Struggling with the words, he finally admits that Gemma is gone not from an accident, as others would claim, but truly dead. The revelation weighs heavily on both of them. When they finally leave the arcade together, Roy notices something shocking. The clock now reads 12:50 p.m. For the first time since the loop began, he has managed to push past the invisible barrier of 12:47 p.m. breaking his own record for survival. For a fleeting moment, there's hope that maybe things can change. Unfortunately, the relief is short-lived. As his life bleeds away, Roy uses his final moments to tell Joe the truth he had never been able to share before: he is his father. With his last breath, Roy reflects that this, perhaps, should have been his final death, the one that mattered most, because it meant protecting his son. Roy soon realizes something crucial: the assassins are always able to find him no matter where he goes, even in places that should have kept him hidden. Later, while sitting in a restaurant, Roy decides to take matters into his own hands. With no time to waste, Roy steels himself and starts yanking them out one by one, ignoring the blood and pain. The first tooth is a miss. The second also yields nothing. Finally, after the third attempt, he finds the tracker, just moments before assassins burst in and kill him yet again. With this breakthrough, Roy begins piecing together how it all happened. Cornered, Alice admits that she wasn't the one who tagged him, it was Brett, one of Ventor's loyal henchmen, who slipped the tracker into his mouth. Armed with this knowledge and his tooth-turned bait, Roy turns the tables on his pursuers. He uses the device to mislead Pam, one of the assassins, luring her into a secluded location where she has no backup. He sets another trap for Smiley, a sadistic assassin who wields a massive harpoon. Timing his ambush carefully, Roy tricks Smiley into charging right into his own demise. For the first time, he is starting to take back control of the endless loop. After eliminating several of the hitmen who had hounded him in earlier loops, Roy begins shifting his focus. Rather than wasting time on every assassin that crosses his path, he now targets the ones who truly matter, the central figures behind the operation. His early attempts end in failure. Still, with every reset, Roy inches closer, studying their routines and tightening the gaps in his strategy. It is, in fact, a machine capable of rewriting history itself. Armed with these new skills, Roy finally confronts Guan Yin once again. In a dramatic duel, Roy overcomes her lethal abilities and finally delivers a decisive blow, ending her threat once and for all. The words hit Roy hard, igniting a desperate sense of urgency. But when he arrives, his heart drops. Joe has already been killed, a victim of the same cycle of violence Roy has been desperately trying to prevent. Horrified and panicked, Roy makes one last desperate dash toward the scene, only to witness the Osiris Spindle activate. For the next 15 loops, he does nothing to fight back, letting the machete-wielding assassin strike him down repeatedly. The repetition, the violence, and the futility weigh heavily on him, dragging him into a dark spiral of despair. But eventually, something within Roy shifts. He resolves to stop wasting the precious time he still has, even if the outcome seems inevitable. He decides to spend his remaining moments with Joe, embracing the role of a father in a way he never has before. Roy heads to the arcade, following the familiar routines he's seen countless times, but this time with purpose and attention. For a brief, precious period, they live as father and son, creating memories that are real even if the day is doomed. Inevitably, Joe falls asleep just before the world ends, a small comfort amid the chaos surrounding them. While talking with Joe, he mentions receiving a voicemail from his mom, Gemma, earlier that day. This small detail gives Roy a surge of hope. It confirms that Gemma is still alive when he wakes up. Energized by this revelation, Roy races to Dino, analyzing the timing carefully. He realizes that from the moment he wakes up, he has at least 14 minutes before Gemma is in mortal danger. For the first time, Roy feels that he has a concrete window of opportunity, a clear plan of action, and a genuine chance to finally save everyone he cares about and perhaps break the cycle once and for all. On his next attempt, Roy decides to take total control of the day. He starts by finally taking down the machete-wielding assassin who has plagued him for so long. Then, forcing the panicked pilot at gunpoint, Roy directs the chopper straight toward Dino, determined to confront the masterminds behind the chaos once and for all. Upon landing, Roy moves with precision, taking out security guards who try to impede him. Pushing forward, Roy makes his way to the main control room, the heart of Dino's operations. Here, he confronts Brett and finally Ventor, dispatching them both with precision. At last, the immediate threats are eliminated. Meanwhile, Gemma witnesses firsthand that the Osiris Spindle functions exactly as she had envisioned, its power undeniable and dangerous. He explains that he is now ready to step into the machine, fully aware that no one can predict what will happen. With a reassuring glance toward Gemma, Roy steels himself and sets foot into the Osiris Spindle, determined to see it through. When he awakens, it is May 9th again, but this time, everything has changed. Roy smirks, a mixture of relief and determination crossing his face. He knows exactly what he must do next, and for the first time, he can move forward with purpose, without the fear of dying repeating endlessly, and with the chance to live fully in the present.